Hi everybody, and welcome to this LinkedIn Live discussion of the dentsu 2024 media trends. We've been producing trend reports for more than 10 years, but this is the first time we've done one of these discussions. The trends came out last Thursday, and you can find a link to download them in the text below. What we've done this year is we've broken the trends down into three big themes. The first theme is about generative AI, which has been the topic of conversation, I'm sure, for many of us in the last few months. The second theme is all about what we're calling the race to monetization. This is really about how, at a time when ad spend is slowing, and particularly the growth of digital ad spend is slowing, the platforms that we all use to advertise on to reach our audiences are getting increasingly competitive with each other, and there are a number of implications for marketers. And then finally, we'll talk about what we're calling integrity economics, and this is about how, at a time where we're all aiming for high growth, things like diversity and inclusion, things like brand safety and brand assurance, and also things like sustainability are central to what we should be doing and not just distractions. So with me today, I've got three colleagues. The first is Aurelia Noel, Head of Innovation and Transformation at dentsu. Secondly, we have Sanjay Nair. Sanjay is a Senior Partner at Global Strategy at Cara. And finally, we've got JG Pommier, who is Head of Innovation at Future Lab, part of iProspect. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, the first theme we wanted to talk about was generative AI. So when we've spoken to clients about this, when we've surveyed clients, 60% say they're either testing it or they're actively using it in what they're doing. So firstly, for Aurelia, can you let me know what you think the most important and interesting cases for clients to be investigating are?
Thank you, Dan. So only the consumer can really decide where AI is going to go. But we are seeing four key areas where AI is showing very positive promises. The first one really is about AI and platforms and how platforms are evolving their offering, but also their algorithm to cater for AI. Second one is really kind of AI and creativity and how we're enhancing human creativity through AI. Third one, I would say, is AI and productivity. So how are we making sure that low value added tasks are being, again, enhanced by AI so that we can really kind of push the limits of human intellect. And then I would say the fourth thing is around consumer experiences and how AI is actually enhancing those experiences. If I may, I wanted to go through a little bit around search and all the things that we're seeing in search and social. So Google and Microsoft have not waited for us to really kind of benefit from AI. But in the last couple of years, what we're seeing is people like Google launching Performance Max or the search generative experience, which is very exciting because it means the way people search is not going to be on keywords anymore. You know, the platforms are going to understand intent, and they're going to make sure that that intent is replicated within their search results. And I think this is very exciting for brands.
Thanks so much. That's really, really good. Yeah, I think search is possibly one of the earlier areas where we're going to start to see things really being noticed by consumers, but also ourselves as we use the technology ourselves. But now turning to Sanjay. Sanjay, what would you say some of the misconceptions around AI when we're using it for marketing would be?
So, I mean, AI, I think, is a topic that almost is inevitable in any conversation about advertising or anything at the moment, right? But there does feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about AI, about the role it'll play, the disruption it'll bring in. And often the word disruption is used for AI, whereas the way I would see it would be it's an enabler, an incredible force multiplier. It hopefully will take away a lot of the mundane work that we do and allow us to sort of power and amplify the more profound differences we can make. And as a marketer, the best bit is there's always been that gap between your ambition as a brand versus the reality of marketing, the operational challenges. AI helps maybe bridge many, if not all of that. And that's incredibly exciting. So to me, it's a positive, and I can't wait for that future to come.
I agree. I think the next couple of years or longer are going to be so fascinating in terms of, what actually changes, what parts of our, what boring elements of what we do at the moment get removed, and things get simplified and just free us up to do so many more things. But then turning back to you, Aurelia, for a second. So again, when we spoke to our clients, when we asked them about a number of important topics, with AI, many more of them were enthusiastic about what it would do in terms of how it would change their working lives, their business lives. But when we asked them about how it would actually, or how it could potentially make an impact on society, what we saw was people being a lot more cautious. So how do we make sure that we get the sort of benefits that Sanjay was talking about? We get the sort of freedoms, the sort of productivity gains and things like that, without all the negatives that our imaginations can tell us and we can read about in newspapers and things like that. How do we actually make sure the bad stuff doesn't happen?
I think as brand and advertisers, we have a duty of safeguarding our consumers, safeguarding that human behind the impression. I think it's very easy to be lost in technology. But the idea there is really, again, using AI to enhance human potential, not letting AI go loose, but really kind of focus on adding human efforts and really increasing that relationship brands can build with their consumers. I think the other thing for me is really about training the AI so it becomes less biased. And that's something, again, when we talk about deep fake, Tom Hanks will agree with me there. We really need to kind of ensure that we train AI on unbiased data. And I think lastly is about being authentic as a brand. So if you use AI, I want to know about it.
Yeah, and I think people are starting to put tags on things. I read that TikTok was starting to put a tag on things saying this content is AI generated and things like that, because I think for many of us, you can't really tell anymore. I've certainly seen some examples where, in fact, that it's almost like it's quite hard to spot Photoshops if you're not skilled in these sorts of things. With AI, it's pretty hard to spot deep fakes unless you spend an awful lot of time, watching videos and the sorts of things to look out for. So now turning finally to JG. So looking at the sort of practicalities, what are the first things people should start to do when they start to work with generative AI? What are the sorts of steps they should go through? What are the sort of questions they should ask themselves?
Yeah, definitely, Dan. So really exciting times, agree with everybody. So for me, I think there are three things, and it's all about augmenting what we already do. So some of these themes will probably be familiar, but how we approach them is probably going to be new. So the first one is we in media are all about understanding our consumers, right? So the new signals we're getting, the sophisticated language models, that means we're more nuanced, means it's a lot more exciting. We're going to really get to a point where probably what voice search was trying to do kind of a few years ago, we're getting to a point where intent, to Oliver's point, is going to get much more refined. So that for us means our tools like dentsu, our great CCS panel, means that's going to get more refined. That's going to get smarter and understanding those consumer traits, which means we will be much better. The second thing I think will be really interesting is really practically hyper personalization at scale. Has been a buzzword for quite a while. But I think now we're getting to a place where all these big platforms are enabling that, and it's much easier for us to really kind of deliver on that promise. And lastly, I think for me, the big thing that's also really important, and I think 86% of the CMOs we surveyed said the same, is the efficiency piece. All the smaller tasks, all these elements, our ability to just from a performance perspective really increase those gains is going to go through the roof. And even within things like ideation, we're seeing really interesting territories where AI can help us just get to an answer quicker.
So JG, what you're saying in effect is we're going to be able to do a lot more good work. We're going to be able to understand the consumer better and more easily. We're going to be able to produce potentially more content, more aimed at different sorts of people, being authentic to people in different sorts of ways, rather than, effectively, to give us much more flexibility in how we work.
Exactly that. That's why it's exciting.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. So I wanted to move on to the next part of the trend report. So the second theme is what we're calling the race to monetization. And this is really something around what's happening with the digital partners that we all rely on. So, the big platforms like Alphabet, like Meta, but also potentially the smaller ones like X and like Reddit and those. So I've got a few questions for you around those. But the important thing all the sort of background to this is really that what we've seen through our work in understanding ad spend is that while ad spend within digital is still rising, it's almost like it's plateauing. So over the last 20 years or so, we've seen enormous growth up to the point where it's now nearly 60% of global ad spend. It went from far below TV to now far above TV. But they got used to this enormous level of growth. And now over the next 3 years, what we're predicting is only about 6% growth a year or so. So what this means is that within these platforms, they're just really looking for every extra dollar, whether it be from their advertisers, whether it be from their users, in charging them for extra services, things like that, or whether it be simply from each other. So just ramping up the competition that they have against each other. So the first one of these questions, this time I'm heading to Sanjay first. And one thing we've noticed is that increasingly all the apps look the same. So they all seem to have the same sort of features. So when you think back to when you first got a smartphone, or sort of back in the early 2010s, when lots of new apps were being launched, the thing about Snapchat was it was disappearing messages. The thing about Twitter was it was very text-based. It wasn't like having friends, it was like following people. The thing, obviously, later on with TikTok was it was these amazing vertical videos. If you didn't like it, you could just scroll up and there immediately was another one. And they all had these unique features. What we've seen in the last few years is essentially they've all co-opted the same features. So increasingly we're getting to a point where all the apps look the same, to the point that with the new version of the Spotify app, it has the playlist as vertical videos. So Spotify now looks like TikTok as well. So, but within this context, if all the apps look the same, how do we help our clients stand out? How do brands look differentiated and brands look different when increasingly the canvas they're on looks the same?
Well, I mean, I'll take your analogy, Dan, where if the canvas is the same, it's all on the artist, isn't it? And I think it comes down to, as a dyed-in-the-wool marketer, it comes down to what we do with the brand, how we bring the brand to life regardless of platform. And to me, that's an incredible opportunity. That's incredibly exciting, because ultimately, we've had a few years where our focus was entirely on what was new. Right? We were insistent on there's a new platform, there's a new social media, there's a new trend, there's new ways of using certain platforms, or their new formats. And always the focus was on the new. We now need to go back to the focus on what's brilliant. And that is exciting and amazing. And the first trend we talked about, the power of AI and how it can help us, may actually enable us to bridge these and deliver that brilliance across platforms. So if we have the same canvas, it's the best news ever. Maybe a lot of Picassos are in the making.
That's a really good point. I mean, we're all long enough in the tooth to remember when you had to make a separate ad for Snapchat and a separate ad for Twitter and a separate ad for Instagram, because they all had slightly different specs and things like that. I mean, the good news for advertisers is there's a greater level of interoperability now. You can make a square or rectangular video ad and you can put it almost anywhere. But as you say, the point is you've got to be the best possible artist to make what you do stand out.
Absolutely.
So now turning to Aurelia. So another of the trends that that we're highlighting is really all about how identity is so much more important. So classic example of this, Netflix earlier this year sort of essentially started to deal with this thing which has been going on for a long time, which is that people were mentioning no names, sharing their account details outside their home, letting their friends log in using their details on the nights they weren't using it and things like that. Netflix has started to crack down on this by insisting that people create their own accounts. They're using the data they can, including IP addresses, to see this is not the same person, this is somebody different, you've got to create your own account. And I think one of the reasons for this is that even though I think less than 5% of Netflix accounts now take advertising, Netflix is in the advertising business. So it's now much more important to them than ever to know what sort of person watches The Crown, what sort of person watches Stranger Things. So they're really much more keen to understand who their users are. And in the same way with platforms like Instagram, with platforms like X, with platforms like Snapchat again, they're selling an enhanced version called, usually called something, well, with some sort of verification, which again gives them more information about who their users are. So more than just an email address, it gives them a card. So it's almost proving this is a real person. So essentially what the platforms are trying to do is to make sure they know much more about their customers, which is obviously something that we're trying to do on behalf of our clients as well. And this leads us into the whole area of data partnerships and things. So how can we ensure we get the best data partnerships for our clients where the platforms are going to have much better first-party data? Hopefully our clients will as well, but how do we actually mesh that data together?
Thank you, Dan. So I think back to what Sanjay was saying, we have a canvas, we have an artist, now we need the colors. And that's what first-party data gives you. And the thing we have with partnership is it gives us access to something we call clean room, which is basically you show me your data, I show you mine, and we make great things together. And I think this is what we have through our AMC Center of Excellence in dentsu, is that idea of what are the use cases, how can we bring those first-party data together to again continue to increase the value adds that people get from the platform, from the brand, because I think when we're talking about AI, when we're talking about first-party data, it's really about building a better value exchange and building better lifetime value for our customer. I think the other thing, when you said user verification, this is to me the new gold standard. No brand should go without having verification in place. You can monetize it or not, but it's about kind of building that relationship. You know me, I know you, we trust each other. And then finally, I think it gives a new dimension to what we call data-driven marketing. And there are going to be new bridges that we're going to need to build between, Amazon and the brands, between Alphabet and the brands, between Meta and the brands, and all the others that will come along. But it's again exciting because it really brings that idea of value exchange. Value exchange is not new, but the technology is now helping us making it a reality.
That makes an awful lot of sense. I mean, I think since we have to, the other thing that's happening next year is that Chrome is very, very likely to finally remove the ability to place third-party cookies. And so it really does have to be all about first party. And, in a way, the platforms are showing everybody the way forward, saying we need to know much more about our users, and we're, potentially selling it in different sorts of ways, potentially wrapping it up in different sorts of languages. But it's ultimately all about knowing the customer, and that should be fantastic for us as marketers. And then the final trend in this section I wanted to talk about was, again, turning to you, JG, where one of the things we've noticed is that the platforms are simply putting many more ads on than they used to. So this is both in terms of increasing the ad load. I think Meta said in their most recent results that they showed 34% more impressions to their users, and their user numbers only went up by 5% or something. So obviously, each person is getting to see more ads. But then also what they're doing is they're creating new ad opportunities. Since we finished writing the report, we had the case of Amazon effectively putting ads into Prime TV from the start of January next year, and doing it as something you'd need to opt out of rather than something you'd need to opt into. So effectively there are more ads, it doesn't sound all that logical for an agency to be complaining about there being more ads, but the problem is you get more clutter. So we're fighting against every other ad, which is trying to gather the attention of all of our users, all of the audiences that we're going after. So what do we do about this?
Fascinating point. And I think what's really interesting for me is, You mentioned the Amazon example. People watching this in a couple of weeks, a couple of months, or reading the trends report will have so many new betas coming up. So we're getting to a space where I guess we can always say that, but the amount of newness that all these platforms are throwing at us is definitely accelerating. So I think brands probably have to do two things really well. First of all is really lean into that experimentation mindset, right? It's about understanding that you need to be very close to what's coming out, making sure you have a clear innovation roadmap to figure out what's relevant for you, what's not, testing to learn fast and scale. So a lot of what we do at iProspect is connecting that kind of innovation mentality, but all of that needs to ultimately be underpinned by what works. And you made a really good point around so many ads and attention only being so much. So for me, that experimentation needs to be underpinned by really robust attention, measurement, and focus. So we're lucky at dentsu, we're very strong in that space, and therefore everything I've mentioned needs to be through the lens of where is my audience going to be, where do I need to be, and which are the new opportunities that are driving the right attention versus potentially, annoying or creating clutter. So measurement of attention will be your guiding principle to make sure that experimentation works.
I think attention is the key to this. So attention takes it one step beyond viewability. Not only was the ad in screen when, fully in screen when the page loaded, but also was the user did they actually notice it on the page using things like eye tracking and stuff like that as well. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I mean, I think we're going to come on to attention later on when we look at the final theme as well. So the final theme that we wanted to talk about was what we're calling integrity economics. And this is really the growing importance of things like diversity and inclusion, things like brand safety and brand assurance, and also things like sustainability in a world where, in the current economic climate, all a lot of people are thinking about is how to grow. And the point is that these things are not contradictory to growth. These things can actually be drivers of growth. So firstly, I wanted to turn to you, Aurelia, and say, when we're talking about diversity, the world is becoming more diverse. The world is becoming more diverse both in terms of racial identity, but also in terms of sexuality, sexual identity, how people represent themselves. How do we as an agency reflect this in our media planning and our media buying?
I think you're right. I mean, diversity is a fact of life. And as marketers, we've always been about representing society as a whole. That's what we've done in media for the last 100 and something years. But the way we do media is changing. So I would start with, bias in technology and being able to tackle that bias in technology. So feeding the algorithms so they look at more diverse data sets, more diverse content, so that we don't have like a one-size-fits-all type of results into our algorithm. The second part is really about giving diverse voices a forum to grow. And I think all marketers are a bit guilty of not giving diverse voices enough time or airspace. So I think, as agencies, we need to collaborate better with minority-owned advertisers. We need to really push our clients to drive partnerships. And we really need to kind of have feedback loops with those diverse communities to understand if the brand is doing it well. I mean, brands have the net promoter scores. They need to have a net diversity score as well.
How would that work, the net diversity score?
So that would be a survey, just like when you receive your net promoter scores, would you recommend that brand to somebody else? Is say, do you think you were equally represented through my brand? And people will say yes, no. And so it's just one simple question. Do you feel like I represent you?
That's really good. That's really, really good. Thank you. I think more and more clients are asking us these sorts of questions. More and more clients are cognizant of the issue, wanting to make sure, certainly if they're a global brand, wanting to make sure that they're authentic wherever they have an existence, wherever they're trying to appeal to people, and they're not simply showing the same sort of cookie cutter images of who their customers are and things like that. And I think we see this across the board. But now turning to you, JG. So this is really all about what's happening in the sort of the global political climate. So one of the questions we asked our clients in a recent survey was, do you think the world is going to be more turbulent in 2024? And 80% of our clients said it's either going to be as turbulent or it's going to be more turbulent. And this potentially raises huge issues around things like brand safety. So I think, no brands really want to be advertising on, next to hate speech or advertising next to really controversial opinions or content which doesn't really fit their values and things like that. So how does this actually, how do clients actually navigate this area?
Very good point. So I think for me, there are two levels. First of all, the macro level. I think we definitely would recommend just brands to be really bold. So it starts by really understanding what you stand for, connecting meaningfully with the audience. And we know consumers are looking out more and more to brands versus maybe more traditional institutions where there's a bit of a trust deficit. So it's about doing that in a honest, kind of meaningful way. So that's the first bit. Like, you need to know what you stand for, and maybe you're not relevant to talk about ABC, but you're super relevant to talk about item number D over there. So that's the basis. That feeds into the more micro level question around kind of brand safety with those evolution of context and technology. And on that one, I think, again, like, you need to ask yourself as a brand, how does that translate into very kind of more detailed brand safety kind of governance? And what we find is when 73% of all display is moving towards programmatic very soon, like the evolution of technology means there's probably going to be more dangers and threats, but equally more interesting solutions. So it's really important that the starting layer has to be governance, and what humans who decide what that governance looks like want it to stand for, but being very close to evolution in technology, new partners, new ability to have smarter linguistic, not keyword-based stuff to really protect and make sure you're not in areas you don't want to be in. But I'd probably finish by going back to what you were saying already around that could also be a bit of a challenge around not supporting diversity in the way you'd think. So being very mindful around if it's too keyword specific, all of a sudden you might be excluding a whole bunch of diversity or minority kind of pieces of content. So just being really mindful of that and training the algorithm, to your point, to kind of not get stuck into that rut.
I think those are really good points. I think another point that is also worth considering is just almost going back to the first theme. So it's about the role of AI within all of this. And AI can both hinder but also can hurt the whole area of brand suitability, brand safety. So one thing we've seen a lot of discussion around in the last year is the creation of what are being termed MAFs, another three-letter acronym for the industry, as if we needed another one. But MAFs, or MFAs rather, are made for advertising sites. And effectively, they're very clickbaity. You quite often arrive through clickbait on social media where it looks like a really interesting article that all of your mainstream media sources have missed somehow. But actually the point is it isn't true, or it's either not true or it's massively exaggerated. And these things have been deliberately created to trick the DSPs into giving them ads and therefore giving them payment. And they genuinely get lots of traffic. But the point is the traffic doesn't stay for long because people think, well, actually, this isn't as interesting as I thought it would be. So I'm not going to stay here for very long, and I'm definitely not going to pay much attention to the advertising which is next to it. So I think that's one area where AI is potentially making the problem worse. But AI is also potentially making the problem better because it's also getting better at spotting these sorts of sites, but also with things like moderation. When we talk to partners like Meta, they give us examples of, X% of comments or X% of hate speech is removed before they get any impressions at all, before they get viewed by anybody, and things like that. So AI sort of going back to the start of the discussion, AI is also having an impact on all of those sorts of things as well.
And to your point, I think attention also is another way to get around it, because that is a short-term gain for people doing that. But I say, as a brand, attention and having a very clear sense of where you're appearing, and the brand list and the site list and all these things will allow you to, make sure you're not in those spaces.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, within this section, the final trend we talk about in the whole report is all about sustainability. And so what we've seen in the last year is record temperatures again for the world. And so this problem is not going away. In fact, it's getting worse. So final question for you, Sanjay. In this world of rising temperatures, in this world of greater concern around things like carbon footprints and things like that, what can brands actually do around trying to measure and mitigate, or try to accelerate how they're actually trying to limit the footprint of their own media campaigns?
I mean, it's a fascinating question. It's a question that seems to grip almost every brand that we work with. And I think the challenge is often that in the sustainability space, the problems seem enormous. So the solutions never quite feel like they scale to the challenge. However, that's quite a negative, a glass half full type view. I mean, the brands that we work with in dentsu are already making steps. Some very small, operational, but they will make a difference. And others are really taking on and embracing the challenge. The reality is you can make a difference almost regardless of size or scale of your ambition. So I'll take a few examples. For instance, we're already working with some of our clients measuring the carbon footprint of media. Now, by measuring it, you bring the problem to the front, and then you realize, there are some quick and easy wins, some harder, longer term wins, but you can definitely make a difference in terms of reducing your carbon footprint, reducing the amount of wastage, both from a point of view of carbon and actually, as it turns out, investment and money. So it's a bit of a win-win. So this idea of sustainability can have this very operational execution, which says, I have a long tail of advertising that doesn't really deliver a lot to me. So if I have right measurement on carbon, on how it delivers, then I can reduce the long tail, reduce my carbon footprint, maximize the impact. On the other end of the spectrum is this idea of, can we drive behavior change? So we've been working on leveraging ideas on behavioral economics, on how brands can influence consumer behavior. Now, brands have been historically influencing consumer behavior generally with the intent of getting them to buy more. But maybe we can leverage the same power and scale that we have to get consumers to make better choices, better for themselves, for the environment, and hopefully, and in this win-win world, better for the brand as well. So there is a lot we can do. And even though it seems like a massive challenge for a brand to take on, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of expectations from clients and consumers for us to do that and take that lead. JG mentioned that trust deficit of customers and consumers thinking, are the institutions going to solve it? Well, if they're not, we can step in and we can play a role.
I think so, yeah. I think there's kind of like a perception of, I'm only a consumer. It's more for the brand to make things with recyclable packaging or compostable packaging or something like that. But as soon as a brand starts to do that, then I know that I've got the choice to shop with that. So yeah, I think it is a combination of things like, well, both the measurement, but then also obviously the attention piece, where awareness of sustainability is almost like a discipline, really, in saying, if you're conscious of this, if you're measuring this, then your behavior as a brand will change, because you'll then start to think that, that there are externalities between, there are externalities just looking for the cheapest version of something. But then also, as you say, it's the behavioral economics, it's the behavioral science thing of what, we're meant to be experts in this area. We're meant to be experts at changing how people behave, what people buy, how people act, where people go, and those sorts of things.
And attention is actually quite interesting because it's one of those areas which seem to have a win-win. So we've talked about attention and the power of attention delivering more for the brand. But actually, it can help deliver less carbon footprint, because if you're delivering and if you're focusing on maximizing attention, you can cut that long tail of media that's wasted impressions, wasted activity, reduce both the wastage in terms of money, but also in terms of carbon footprint. So there's a lot that can be done, a lot brands can do.
I think it's fantastic that we're all sort of moving on this journey with our clients, and we're all trying to see what impact we have, but also at the same time making the advertising more effective and making the advertising more efficient as well. Fantastic. Well, I think we've got a couple of minutes before we have to wrap up, but I wanted to ask you each a quick question just at the very end. So I'll start with JG because I always seem to finish with you up to now. Which of these trends do you think is most likely to have the biggest impact in 5 years' time?
I'm probably going to go with the first one, and mainly around how our ability to search, we've almost been trained to look at keywords. Yeah. And I guess, again, going back to my point where I worked on voice search campaign many years ago when it was quite funny because it didn't work and look at how rubbish it is and all that kind of stuff. We're getting to the point where technology is going to be quite transparent, and our ability to search because of AI and all these things mean it's going to be so natural as a conversation. So that's, I think, it's just going to accelerate. We're going to be less trained to behave in a specific way for technology, which is going to be more natural, more conversational. And then for us as media and marketers, it's super exciting because then you get slightly more nuance and hopefully, better marketers ultimately. So that's a big one for me.
It's definitely, yeah, I think definitely, I would love to leap forward now into 5 years' time and just see how, how the Google homepage has changed, or if there is even a Google homepage anymore or something. How about you, Sanjay? What would you?
So selfishly, working in media, you obviously want to focus on areas that will influence media. So I think the monetization, the second trend, is something that I'm fascinated by, and because I think there are two elements there, right? One is the way we do media and the way we buy advertising and the way we plan. Obviously, it'll have to change if all of these platforms look similar, have an ad tier and have a two-tiered model, so on. That'll change so much of what we do, and so much will be new and exciting. So that's one. The other side of it is so many consumers are used to a free model, right? They're used to having to not pay for the content they consume, for the social media, for all of this. That changes. How will that influence consumer behavior? It'll be fascinating to watch. So to me, that's, if I were 5 years ahead of now, then I'd be fascinated to see what happens to that behavior and how it changes and evolves.
Yeah, I think we're used to things being free. I mean, nobody ever said, "Can I borrow your Google account?" because you never needed to. But I think if you sort of follow some of the trends to their logical conclusion, there will almost be like a two-stream internet, where there'll be the people who can afford to pay $8 a month or whatever, versus the people using it for free, and that could have some very bad negative connotations as well. And so finally, Aurelia, again, which of the trends do you think is going to have the most impact in 5 years' time?
So I'll go for integrated economics, and the reason for that is I wish it wasn't a trend. I wish it's going to become table stake by the time we arrive to 2030. And I often joke saying, I'm not a heart surgeon, I don't save life. And I think through integrity economics, my job could now save life and make me very proud to work in media.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We're also answering questions in the chat, so keep posting your questions and we will answer them as they come up. Thank you very much, everybody.